𝗦𝗂𝗯𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀 the more that I've studied the ancient indigenous cultures of Peru and Bolivia, looking at the discussions that come out of when you talk to those people and you look at the evidence of locations like 𝗪𝗏𝗂𝗃 and 𝗪𝗏𝗂𝗀𝗃, these strange sites of H blocks and perfectly laser cut stones with these giant gateways, what they talk about is that there was once two continents that no longer exist on the planet. Now, the information for those two places has been largely lost. It's only contained in a couple minor places, and I know this is new to some people, so I'll go over it. But in Bolivia and Peru, we find ancient megalithic stone masonry in everything from Machu Picchu and the pre-Inca, and 𝗦𝘂𝗧𝗏𝗯𝗲 and 𝗪𝗪𝗂𝗯𝗏 and all those sites, and into the other ones near Lake Titicaca that I spoke about, like 𝗪𝗏𝗂𝗀𝗃 and 𝗪𝗏𝗟𝗏. They speak of their progenitors, their ancestors, coming from an ancient land called Mu, M-U, okay? That was existing at the same time as Atlantis. Okay, Mu was the Pacific civilization, the ancient civilization that reached great states, that was from the Hawaiian Islands down through Fiji and over to Easter Island. That was the area of the land of Mu. Now, when that was being destroyed, the fragment of it that remained was called Lemuria. That's what all those ancient stories that come from Hawaii all the way down through Tonga and all the way over to South America, there was an advanced civilization that lived there. At the same time, in the Atlantis, we find through Plato's writing of the 𝗪𝗎𝗓 and Critias that those stories were carried down from an ancient politician named Solon. Solon was a Greek politician who traveled to Egypt, one of the first Westerners to ever go to Egypt, and he met with the priests and the high priests of Egypt at that time, and they told him a great story. They said that their ancestors that created all of Egypt and the pyramids, known as the region of Kem that Billy mentioned, was a breakaway group that came from Atlantis, and that before them was another continent that was west of the Pillars of Hercules, the Straits of Gibraltar, in the mid-Atlantic, right where the ridge is, where all the earthquakes and things can happen. There was another subcontinent there called Atlantis, and it had two capital cities, Poseidon and Atlas. And those two cities ruled this continent. Now, here's what's interesting. I want to connect all of this. They speak about how there was a great war back then, both on a physical level with war, but also on a level of nature and the gods. It was basically a time when Mu Lemuria was described as a divine feminine energy of creation, a place that was more in tune with nature. You can see remnants of that in places like Sulawesi in Indonesia, and some of the islands like Borobudur, some of the temples on those islands. There are remnants of those cultures in those Southeast Asian areas. It was is a very different design. They were more in tune with nature. It was a civilization based on knowledge and spirituality as its focus. Now, Atlantis is spoken about as starting like that, but then taking a completely different path, becoming obsessed with wealth and military power, and eventually using technologies to literally disrupt the entire electromagnetic field of the Earth, and was one of the catalysts for these great Earth changes that looks like it came along and basically destroyed everything in the ancient world. And what we're talking about now is, we don't even know if this is what's known as the Younger Dryas disasters that occurred at the end of the last ice age 12,000 years ago. This may be from a previous age that we're hearing about this, like maybe it's 37,000 years ago. We don't know, but we know in these increments that there were great civilizations here that were in stages destroyed. They all write the same thing, that it didn't happen at one moment. Parts of these continents and areas were like wiped out because ocean levels were rapidly fluctuating and the Earth was going through really huge changes. Volcanoes are going off everywhere, earthquakes. So the people of these subcontinents, the mystics and the secret societies, all grouped together, and they went off to different parts of the world to recreate civilization, because they knew based on all the information they had, understanding the cycles of the zodiacs and the energy of the sun, the planets. They knew that there was going to be, and this is what they write about, a final set of tidal tsunamis, tidal waves that would destroy everything in the world. All of the ancient cultures that were on these continents would be destroyed. So these bands of mystics went off to sites like Tiwanaku, Bolivia, Machu Picchu, 𝗪𝗪𝗯𝗏𝗏, Ollantaytambo, up through the Americas, Chichen Itza, down through Palenque, and Teotihuacan, right? All across the world, creating Kem, the pyramids of Egypt, Göbekli-Tepe. These, in a lot of areas in Anatolia and around the Mediterranean, they attempted to create an entirely new set of civilizations that would also be mapped with the stars and the ley lines of the earth to try to prevent the entire catastrophe of the world, okay? Those continents were being destroyed, imagine. These civilizations are rising up to almost race to try to balance it. They're creating enormous libraries, woven into silica of megalithic temples that we can't even understand because they're not in third dimensional writing. Libraries are deep underground underneath Egypt. Göbekli-Tepe, they were burying it at this time because they knew that these disasters were coming to try to protect all these sites, hiding things in caves. Then what happens? The cataclysms come through just as they predicted, and nearly everything is destroyed. The progenitors of those civilizations find these temples, mostly destroyed, and try to attempt to build on top of them. And the knowledge every time, because there's series of different events that seem to occur throughout history, the knowledge is lost more and more every epoch until you get to the point where we're at now, over the last 5,000, 6,000 years, where humanity is a shell of its former self, and we have fallen from a state of grace to completely forgetting our understanding of spirituality and our connection with the cosmos. And we're trying to get back there as soon as we can so we don't get wiped out again.
Ionis is the most important of those three temples. You could call it the primary, the most holy of all these three temples. Not only that, but I think that Keph and 𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗏 are proxy temples, nodal temples of Ionis. Now, what Ionis is it's a very unusual andesite temple. Andesite is a very hard type of volcanic stone that is built on top of a hill that overlooks the lake. And I believe it acted as a type of sundial, sun temple, where they have these buttress pillars, 4 of them on each corner, that represent, as the sun moves across the sky, it's going to hit these pillars and create different shadows and angles, but only specifically will when the sun comes down from the west and starts to set. It literally sets right into the inner sanctum of Ionis. That's called the 𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗏 temple. And within this inner sanctum, you have the first cross, I believe, in history, like the Knights Templar cross that became later, or the Maltese cross, the Red Cross. These are all later iterations of it. And they have other things like this winged depiction of 𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗏 passing and protecting this cross, with depictions like the sun symbols, like then the hourglass symbol, and all of these, like the griffin symbol, like we see as a protector symbol in the ancient Greek culture, which we can talk about some of the comparisons as we go along. But a lot of these very, very, very sacred, important symbols and motifs that are presented there that are literally laser cut in the andesite. If I was to say, and I've shown this to many archaeologists, I think I've had 3 different archaeologists that have said this statement. I say to them, have you ever seen a temple like Ionis in the world? And they say, honestly, I've never seen anything like it. What's shown at Ionis and the way that it's depicted and cut and designed, it's really stands in its own as a very unique type of megalithic temple. Let me tell you why, Will. Most megalithic temples in the world have shapes, polygonal blocks all fitted together. They're beautiful, but there's nothing carved in them, and there's no symbols usually in them at all. It's just blank. Like, give an example, the Great Pyramid of Giza. No writings and no symbols in that entire pyramid at all. the whole thing is just solid granite and all this like mysterious, like we don't have anything left there. Anything that's a depiction of hieroglyphs came from the dynastic Egyptian culture that came later. They would be like, the dynastic Egyptians would be just like the Urartians in this case, coming later, finding the remnants of this, sometimes writing into it or building on top of it. But Ionis is very unusual because not only does it have writings in the cuneiform in the entryways that talk about, you know, the grandness of Chaldee and the grandness of the temple being built, but there are these bizarre symbols that are all carved within the andesite megalithic temple. Now, I mean, say megalith, very important to understand. We're not talking about mud brick. We're talking about incredibly finely cut, massive andesite, and then on the lower walls coming up to the temple, basalt. But they're these hard stones that are cut perfectly, beautifully polished, and then laser cut are these symbols etched into it, okay, like laser cut. And in some cases, Will, it gets even weirder. Some places you have places where the blocks have joined together perfectly, like you can't fit a human hair between them, but the symbols that are cut seamlessly between the two blocks. Like,
wow, I got you.
Mind-blowing. If we were to look at masons today, and I've talked to some masons today that have analyzed some of the symbol cuts in like 𝗏𝗡𝗀𝗀𝗃, because there's some down there as well, and have analyzed looking at Lake Vaughan with Ionis, and they tell me today that to cut that, you would have to have laser-like technology. Meaning that the more that we look at some of the ways that these are done, the more that it looks impossible it was even done by hand. So if we're looking at the Urartian civilization with their Iron Age tools, or even Bronze Age or Iron Age, doesn't matter what the ages are, it'd be impossible to not only manipulate, but to be able to cut in the type of accuracy and the type of and how perfect these are. It's clearly not Urartian. And that is part of a huge part of the movement of the team that I'm leading around the world, with archaeologists and scientists and experts and a lot of powerful individuals, actually, important people that are part of this, because it's so clear and identified at these sites that it's not Urartian. Because, Will, you can just very clearly see, take a site like Ionis. You have this lower base of this spectacular temple, all these symbols and megaliths, and the floor is actually made out of calcite alabaster. It's absolutely incredible, and so is the altar. It's just the most beautiful temple you've ever gone in. The energy is unreal. Putting your hand on that alabaster altar, I've never felt energy ever like that. It's like you're literally feeling energy surge through your body, putting it on that. And I mean that. I can't say that lightly. But what I'm trying to say is, right above that andesite foundation, you see this huge area of Urartian mud brick. And it's eroded into this, almost decomposed and eroded into what looks like almost like a sand, or like a like barely visible with the mud bricks that have eroded into like a dirt. It looks like almost like a soil or a dirt, but it's actually just layers of the Urartian work. And for any of the experts or people that are asking about this, I asked the question, well, if the Urartians could build with the very hard andesite and basalt and do that beautiful stone masonry, then why did they never do that again?
Now, if there are all these sacred teachings and all these divine symbols, and they're all being connected by all of these great civilizations, many forgotten, that you're trying to help us get an understanding of, what do these divine symbols mean to us?
There's two components for the stone that is important first, I want to say, because it ties into all this. First thing is that andesite and basalt has some of the highest levels of magnetite within the stone. So the mineral structure of those stones has a lot of magnetite, which means there's magnetism properties. So energetically, there's something going on there that we don't fully understand today.
When we look at the artifacts and things that came out of Sumer, we find that they had literally invented everything, and I mean everything. They had invented agriculture, which, by the way, is the building block of an entire civilization. They had invented how to irrigate and how to more sophisticated than we think. They had invented how to irrigate channels to plant, but also how to clear river channels so they wouldn't silt up, so they could be a continuous source of irrigation. Because if you have a region that's somewhat arid, it means that it has a lot of sunshine, and if the soils are fertile and you have the ability to irrigate it, then you can literally have massive abundant crops, and they realized that. But now not only that, they invented metallurgy, they invented mathematics, they invented brewing beer and wine, they invented basically animal husbandry, raising animals, the first writing, the first commerce, government. I mean, we could go on and on and on. Like, basically everything seems to have been lowered down to this ancient Sumerian civilization that is mysterious and alien, and that was just wiped out in this disaster, and then all these mysteries remained after. And the mysteries led to something, though. It led to something incredible, and that's what this story is about to unfold, Will. The Sumerian king list, along with many other tablets from ancient Mesopotamia, were from the original, this sort of proto-civilization that was very mysterious that existed on Earth, that we have a lot of evidence from, but a lot of questions still remain for who they were and where the knowledge that was handed down to them came from. But in these tablets, which are the oldest records on Earth, and we know that because paper only lasts 500 to 1,000 years, and these tablets, being in clay and stone, can last 2, 3, 5,000 years or more. And in many cases, these stories were carried down by other civilizations that understood their past. But the important thing to know here is that this set of tablets, the Sumerian king list, as well as many others like Eridu Genesis, and we look into 𝗦𝗂𝗏𝗏 and this ancient world that we find uncovered through these tablets, discusses how there were 5 original cities created on Earth that were lowered down to this mysterious Sumerian civilization that came out of nowhere. Now, in those tablets, though, we find that the original myths and stories that later became biblical stories, like the Old Testament and New Testament and a lot of the Hebrew stories, a lot of those stories came from the 𝗤𝗏𝗄𝗎𝗪, the Sumerian king list, the Epic of Gilgamesh, those original flood stories. And part of my body of work and my obsession for so many years has been trying to recreate this ancient story and take what once was myth and turn it into reality, but try to connect the story in a way that we can understand our entire past in our epic.